Hello everybody, this is Havoc, and Total War released a video on Three Kingdoms Friday, giving us our first campaign look at how diplomacy has been revolutionized for the game. The video was filled with so much more information than just diplomacy, and as such I wanted to highlight 6 things revealed in the first part of this 2-part series. These are in no particular order or insignificance, so without further ado, let's get into it. First, let's take a look at the design and aesthetics of the game in the current build. Everything we've seen thus far has clung to the ancient Chinese brushstroke, ink, and paper style, and our first solid look at the campaign has not only stuck to it, but really enhanced the theme of this game and the art style of the period. The overview map looks fantastic, with the Warhammer 2-esque transition from map to actual landmass being implemented into Three Kingdoms. The Fog of War reminds me a lot of Civilization 6, but that's nothing I'm opposed to since it really kind of does stick to that Chinese brushstroke feel and ink being revealed, etc, etc. The zoomed in map has some design changes as well. Along with the much more colorful palette and the stark terrain difference China has to offer, there is no longer the generic red border means you're at war, blue border means ally system. Rather, these borders are more pronounced, with the orange one maybe symbolizing an enemy's vassal, while your vassals are outlined in a green and white border. Once understood, I think it will make this map much more readable and just easier in general than previous games. There's also much more detail to all aspects of the user interface and design that makes it unique to any other Total War game to date. Generals are no longer limited to simple 500 by 500 pixel face portraits. The character panel has a slowly moving ink pool as its background, and your banners they wave in the diplomacy menu. And while these are rather small things to bring up in the scope of the game, it gives the sense that Three Kingdoms is alive, and it brings about a sense of immersion and interactivity that is only slightly comparable to something like maybe Shogun 2. Creative Assembly has really stepped up their game with this upcoming title. Turning now to the information side of the campaign, there is a lot to cover. Your map overlay filters have been filed down a bit from previous games, but that could be a work in progress. The most notable filter I saw was the population filter, but that's something we'll get into in just a little bit. Once zoomed in, we can really get some information eye candy. Starting at the top again, there's our turn time, broken down by season and then by year, which is our typical 4 turns per year scenario. I was hoping for a longer year, considering how much happens in this time period, but if the game sticks from 190 in the beginning to the supposed end of the period, which would be around 280, that's about 360 turns, which is about normal. There is our financial situation, which is nothing interesting to note in this video, and then what might be our current food supply, of which is at 0 and something I'll touch on later in the video. Currently, our legendary character only has access to the Jade resource as is seen here, but in just a single frame a tad bit later, we can take a look at all the resources currently available. With 16 resources at the moment, I wanted to point out 3 of the people resources: artisans, entrepreneurs, and industrialists. Having never seen these types before in a Total War game, I imagine that having or trading these resources would give that faction financial or production buffs to your other resources that they could be tied to. For instance, artisans could increase the yield and value of jade, entrepreneurs might buff silk and spice, while industrialists would boost tools, iron, copper, and lumber. It's a really interesting concept that I'm eager to learn about in greater detail sometime in the future. Next, let's take a look at the settlement details of Xiangyang, now only a large village, possibly tier 3, judging by the symbol above the village on the map. Tax exemption makes a return, though as to managing individual taxes per settlement, that's yet to be known. It is currently not generating any food, not a whole lot in taxes, public order is even, with the people sufficiently happy in the upcoming turn. But there are 2 details that stick out to me in this snippet. First, we have food reserves, with Xiangyang having 5 out of the potential 15 max reserved. The tool forge in the other village, currently not in our possession, adds to that capacity. What this does is unclear in the video, though I imagine that the more reserves you have, it's possible the longer you can hold out in the event of a siege. It is also possible that the food reserves are part of keeping your army well fed and supplied once inside of the region. We also see what I had mentioned earlier in the video, population. There's been a lot of comments in other people's commentaries as well as the Total War video itself stating that the population looks to be a simple rewording of growth in the city, where upon hitting the 400 pop inside Xiangyang, we have the potential to level up. I'd like to counter that idea as we turn back to the tool forge and see that having possession of a tool forge increases the population capacity by 50. I don't see any logical point of increasing the maximum population needed to level up a village, so there has to be some other explanation for the mechanic, a reason as to why there's a need for a higher population capacity. Heading over to the army overview, there are several things to quickly notice. Army size, upkeep, movement points, they're easily recognizable. There might be some army-wide buffs down at the very bottom, and something I'm very excited that's making a return and was mentioned earlier, supplies. Going beyond simple attrition, a supply mechanic will really add some strategy to the game, giving you the opportunity to starve out a superior enemy as they attempt to conquer. It may also force you to do things you might not want to, like sack a village or even just raid in the area to keep your army going. I am a huge fan of supplies as long as it's well developed and not something shallow that's tacked on as an afterthought. One final thing to mention is this button right here. While it's known that certain generals can only have certain units in their retinue, there might be the possibility of recruiting what units you want inside of those limitations. It's been implied through previous blogs and other videos that you'll only recruit generals and that's it. So hopefully it's just misunderstood and that we can still craft our own armies in a sense and not just leave chance to the wind. Being a diplomacy focused video, it's no wonder there's a lot of information on the characters. Information is easily accessible and easy to comprehend, with no sub-menus to keep clicking through to get to them. Aside from your faction leader, the two generals shown give their general type, their title, their age, upkeep, and what might be considered their personal satisfaction inside their faction. Their satisfaction level determines if they stay or if they leave for another faction, taking whatever units they have with them. So it's an important thing to consider, and is much like loyalty in other Total War games. Their level rank has a swirling orb behind it, which is possibly to denote their general type as well. Fast forwarding ahead a few frames, and on the left side of the character, what weapons, armor, and mounts and other special things he might have. It's been confirmed for a while that the romanticized version will have Warhammer style generals with unique items that can be acquired through battles and with other generals and whatnot. What's nice about this format is again not having to go fully into completely new windows to get this information. It's right there, easy to access. Next, there's the breakdown of the 5 attributes. Instinct affects charge and recruitment cost, resolve, general health, fatigue resistance, and population growth. Cunning focuses on ranged effects, income and supplies. Expertise affects the proficiency of both your armies and settlements. And finally, authority gives your own retinue, morale, and running speed buffs, as well as public order. These 5 attributes are influenced by characters' traits, which are in turn affected by their actions both on the battlefield and in the campaign. One really interesting thing about each of these traits is they come with an admiration or despising of another trait. This means your characters will like or dislike other characters on the map based on what traits they have. This has repercussions for diplomacy, as Louis Biao might not be so willing to bargain with someone who lacks education and intelligence. The same could go the other way, as the AI wouldn't want to deal with him because he's indecisive, which means he might be potentially untrustworthy in that aspect. Taking note of a couple more things on this panel are the skills, military, and relations tabs, with the relations tab most likely giving us quick insight on who Louis Biao has met and what he thinks of them. The military tab is currently selected, giving us our current retinue and any special units that might be recruitable, including a unit that's not accessible yet. One final aspect of characters, and I'm done with this section, we get a look at the faction summary and our legendary general's rank. Only a noble at the moment, but it's still very early in the campaign. And as you can see, you can increase your prestige through capturing and expanding settlements and constructing buildings. What's more interesting to me are at the bottom 3 perks. Assignment capacity is an interesting one. Where at any random point in previous games you could have a handful of missions to complete, it appears that there is a limitation by the rank of your leader. What assignments received are unknown at the moment, but you might want to be more selective with that in mind. Administrators provided could be a tie to governors, but I think there could be governors from the get-go. Trade agreement capacity is my favorite, as it means one can't just go make thousands in trade revenue from the beginning because there is simply not the means to have that many trade agreements. It also means from a diplomatic standpoint that you might have to risk upsetting previously long-standing agreements if another much more lucrative agreement opens itself up. I'm a really big fan of limiting number of agreements based on their leader rank 100%. Diplomacy makes a massive comeback in this video, and it is what gives me a reignited hope for Three Kingdoms. Not that I'm saying everything here is new, rather it is a combination of old mechanics making a desperately sought after return, and some implementations of Diplo mechanics from other grand strategy titles. Going back to our food problems at the start of the video, Louis Biao begins with 2 vassals, one of which has the food needed. Food being a trade resource now, Louis Biao asks for all the food he can manage, and here's where something like Stellaris steps in, the haggling mechanic steps in. There's now the ability to see just how plausible a deal is going to be accepted, which has been needed in Total War diplomacy for a long time and brings a great sense of satisfaction to the table. I'll use this food scenario to go through the Diplo of options available, and I'll try to be quick. Making a return is the regular payment system, defaulted to 10 turns. You can use trade ancillaries, which are character items you'd be willing to trade. This could be a big incentive to propose in a peace treaty, where you could give a superior enemy an incentive of a legendary weapon or item to seize a war. Switch that around and you could convince a lesser faction to vassalize through the same items if you're that much stronger. Not available to Louis Biao at the moment, but still another great comeback, is trading territories. Finally, we can get our full provinces back through trade and not war in our campaigns. Arranging marriages has a new twist, as now you can negotiate whether the newlyweds will stay with your faction in your family or go over to the other family. This is a very interesting diplomacy tool, not to mention a great way to install a potential heir agent scenario to take a faction's territories on the leader's death. Among the war and peace options, you can issue an ultimatum to your vassals, demanding that they comply with what you are demanding or else. This might work if you're strong enough, though I reckon that's going to leave a sour taste in their mouths, and they just might seek the support of another faction down the line. Other options to look at are requesting permission to go to war, something new if you're under a certain faction as a vassal. You can call various versions of arms as well as aid other factions in their wars. And lastly, you can support the independence of another faction's vassals, wherein you would go to war with the faction's overlord should they not grant said independence. At a future point in the game, we can form a coalition, which I imagine isn't as strong as a military alliance, rather an agreement to all fight against one single faction. It'll be interesting to see just how this works in the context of Total War, as it does work with other Paradox games, but it'd be a little iffy here. Next up are the actual diplomatic treaties, and this is where interaction with other factions gets the good treatment. Along with the typical treaties and past installments, there's now the ability to guarantee the autonomy of a vassal. This means you agree to never annex its territories. Of course, you could always do that to secure them, then backstab them at a later time. You are the overlord after all. There's also the option to liberate your vassal for whatever bizarre reason would call for it, and you can confederate with a similar faction or annex your vassals to absorb them into your empire. The last set of diplomatic mechanics involves the quick deal diplomacy. Here, you can select what agreement you'd like to negotiate, and it will show you the faction's chances that such a deal can be struck. No haggling, no threats, just straight up diplomatic talks. The quick deal is a nice touch for those who don't want to go faction by faction looking and haggling for a simple trade agreement or non-aggression. And that's all I'll be covering for this first part of the Three Kingdoms diplomacy videos. While a majority of what was presented is not new to the strategy world, both the new additions to the Total War Diplo scene as well as the options brought back from the dead are giving a lot of life back to Total War, and I believe that Creative Assembly will find that it's bringing a strategic competence back that's been sorely missed for a very long time. I hope you enjoyed this look at the diplomatic scene in Three Kingdoms so far. If you did, be sure to subscribe to the channel, then click the bell to turn on alerts. This lets you know when I've uploaded future videos so you're always up to date. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.